Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Jim Parsons. I am Programs Director for Preservation Houston, and I want to welcome you all to tonight's program, The Sublime Art, Victor Lundy's Modernism. We'll get things started in a moment, but I want to remind you first that Preservation Houston is Houston's only citywide historic preservation nonprofit organization. We are working to celebrate and to protect the city's architectural and cultural heritage, and our work depends a lot on the support of our members. So if you are a Preservation Houston member, thank you. Access to some of our public programming, like tonight's event, is free for you as one of your member benefits. If you are not a member, then I hope you will consider joining us. You can learn more about Preservation Houston and read up on our member levels and benefits at preservationhouston.org/join. We are happy to be partnering on tonight's program with an organization that we admire very much, Houston Mod. It's a nonprofit dedicated to promoting the appreciation and preservation of modern architecture and design in Houston and across Texas. We are fortunate enough to get to work with Houston Mod often, both in presenting programs like this one and also in our day-to-day work. If you're not familiar with Houston Mod, I hope you'll visit their website, houstonmod.org. They are also a membership organization, and I'm sure they'd be happy to have you as members as well. I also want to mention that Preservation Houston is supported in part by a grant from the City of Houston through Houston Arts Alliance. Our speakers tonight are going to be happy to take your questions. We have Steve Curry, who is the president of Houston Mod, a partner with Curry Boudreau Architects, and a moderator extraordinaire. He is going to be handling the Q&A and discussion later this evening, so feel free to send Steve your questions at any time during the night, and then we will get to as many of them as we can at the end of the evening. And my tip to you is this: if you think of something that you're curious about, go ahead and send in that question using either the Q&A function or the chat function on Zoom. That way you don't have to hold the question in your head. You can go ahead and get it written down, and then Steve will be monitoring those and will field those at the end of the program. Now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Donna Kacmar is an architect, educator, and author. She teaches at the University of Houston's Hines College of Architecture and Design, and she's a principal at Architect Works. And Donna spearheaded and edited the 2018 book, Victor Lundy, Artist Architect, which is a look at the life and work of tonight's subject. And if this is a book that you don't already own, it's well worth seeking out, so be sure and ask Donna how to find a copy. Stephen Fox is an architectural historian, a fellow of the Anchorage Foundation of Texas, and a lecturer at the Rice School of Architecture and the Hines College of Architecture and Design. Stephen has written extensively on architecture and design in Houston. He's the author of The Houston Architectural Guide, The Country Houses of John F. Staub, and most recently, The Architecture of Birdsall P. Briscoe. And Stephen also contributed a chapter on Victor Lundy's Houston work for Donna's book. Now, Donna and Stephen are both here to discuss Victor Lundy, who is a remarkable but underappreciated modern American architect. You're going to hear a lot about his background and work tonight, and I'm happy to say Victor Lundy is alive and well. He is living in Houston. He's looking forward to his 102nd birthday early next year. He did recently move out of his house in Bel Air, and you're going to hear more about that tonight, but I also just want to put a bug in your ear. We are working on holding an open house at the Lundy House on Saturday, September 7th. So not this Saturday, but the next Saturday. Steve can fill you in more about that during the Q&A. But for now, I will get out of the way and turn things over to Donna to begin the program. I can't wait to hear more about Victor Lundy, and I look forward to seeing you all at the end of the evening.
Great. Thank you, Jim, and thank you to Preservation Houston and Houston Mod. I'm thrilled to be here to talk about the work of Victor Lundy. I'm also just really honored to have had the privilege to get to know Victor. I treasure the numerous afternoons that I spent with him talking about architecture at his house in Bel Air. And while I edited this book about Victor and wrote several of the chapters, I also had several contributors. We are lucky to have Stephen Fox with us today, but I also want to let you know that I had many other contributors: Nadir Tarani, C. Ford Petrus, Christopher Wilson, and Christopher Dahman, as well as Joan Brierton and Sarah Gardner. I was first introduced to Victor Lundy and his lovely and talented wife, Anstis Lundy, at a dinner party about 25 years ago. These photos are from Victor and Anstis on a train to Venice in 1964. Victor Lundy was born on April 1st, 1923 in New York City. He's the only son of Russian immigrants. He was known as the school's artist in his 6,000 boy public high school. And this drawing of a bull's head was done by Victor when he was just 17. Victor soon went on to New York University on a full scholarship and began to learn about architecture in the Beaux Arts tradition. This sketch is from one of his college courses where there was a real emphasis on both drawing and the history of architecture. You might notice he received an A. In December of 1941, Victor enlisted in the Army and earned advanced acceptance in the Army Specialized Training Program, ASTP, that was established to produce officers for what was assumed to be the imminent reconstruction of war-torn Europe. He was sent to the University of Maine and trained for 8 months. The ASTP was abandoned, and all soldiers in the program suddenly became infantrymen and were sent to Europe. Victor carried sketchbooks with him and documented villages and fellow soldiers. Of the 27 sketchbooks that he filled, only 8 survived. They are now at the Library of Congress along with his architectural archive. This sketch was made just 11 days before Victor himself was wounded. On November 12th, 1944, Victor was hit by fire from a German Tiger tank. Victor spent several months at an Army medical center in England, where Dr. Hamper Kalekian, an orthopedic surgeon from Chicago, noticed his war sketchbooks and managed to keep Victor there, making detailed drawings of surgeries. Victor then spent 8 months at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C. before World War II ended. This sketch of his bandaged left hand is from June 12, 1945. After the war, Victor continued his architectural education at Harvard, this time learning from Bauhaus masters Walter Gropius and Marcel Breuer. He learned to draw in the modernist style with black ink. Victor graduated from Harvard with both a bachelor's and a master's degree in architecture. He applied for and was awarded the Roach Traveling Scholarship by the Boston Society of Architects in 1948. And we know everywhere that Victor traveled on this scholarship due to the detailed letters he wrote back home to friends and colleagues, describing which towns he went to, what he saw, what architects he met with. From July 1948 until January 1950, he toured through the towns and countryside, visiting many countries in 18 months of travel that he says changed his life. He did many watercolor paintings, such as this one, which might be his first painting from that trip. This is in Stockholm, where his boat first landed. He documented ports, such as this one in Tunisia, or sometimes small villages at short train stops during the travel. In fact, Lundy really continued to travel and sketch the world around him throughout his life. These later, this oil pastel sketch is one of many from these larger travel sketchbooks that are also now at the Library of Congress. He drew buildings and sometimes faces and people. And I asked him about this particular image of the Trevi Fountain in Rome because it shows up several times in different sketchbooks. And he told me that there was a flat area at just the right height for his sketching pad, and nearby was another flat place to set his oil pastels. And these two things determined the view that he would re-examine on many visits. Upon returning back to the US from the Roach, Lundy became a licensed architect in the state of New York in 1950. And then a project took him to Sarasota, Florida. He fell in love with Sarasota and practiced there for 8 years. Lundy read in the Sarasota Herald Tribune about a church on a wonderful tree-filled site, and the service was held while everyone was sitting in their cars. He soon introduced himself to the pastor, Pastor White, and Lundy suggested designing a platform to help lift the pastor up in the air so that he could be seen by the congregation. So Victor designed the drive-in church in Venice, Florida, called the Venice Nokomis Presbyterian Church of 1954. He designed an inexpensive structure using wood framing and plywood and donated his design services. This pro bono project really made his name when the building was featured in Life magazine in the April 18th, 1955 issue. It is Victor that is sitting behind the steering wheel of the car in this photo. Lundy's drawing skills also brought him his first paid architecture commission. He entered and won a watercolor competition in Sarasota. And when Carl Bickel, who was one of the jurors of that competition, found out that Victor was also an architect, he asked Victor to do a few sketches for a new Chamber of Commerce building. Victor went to the site, and with a giant easel, he produced 4 paintings, and he was hired. So for the Sarasota County Chamber of Commerce building of 1956, Lundy designed a pavilion with a big sheltering roof. He also designed the desks and millwork underneath that roof. Lundy's work has often been described as more roof than walls, and this is certainly true in his first paid commission. Here, the wood roof extends outward, and these drawings really show his understanding of wood and wood detailing. At a talk about 10 years later, Lundy shared his thoughts on wood. He said that wood is a living, resilient material. It is totally unlike steel or concrete. It has air in it. It comes mainly from above the earth, not beneath the earth. Wood, by its very nature, suggests exciting, alive directions in buildings. Just south of Sarasota, Lundy designed a house with this inward focus, with the private spaces radiating around a central circular living space. But it was the curved roof form that came first before the plan organization in the Heron House of Venice, Florida of 1957. A sweeping wing shape of laminated wood beams supports the curving roof form made of solid wood decking. Lundy kicked up the roof edges that extend the roof overhang. And in this contemporary building, we can see how Ursula Cole and Peter Bartos, the sole shareholders of the real estate development company that now owns the Heron House, and the work they did to renovate the house in 2014. For the same client, Samuel Heron, Victor later designed the Warm Mineral Springs Motel, another structurally innovative building. Here, 75 thin shell, mushroom-like concrete forms were made by a young local contractor. Victor produced the detailed drawings of the formwork that was required. And looking from above and looking down, you can see that there is a drain pipe in the middle of each column, and that the columns alternate in height. Lundy has called these columns a forest of architectural palms. This checkerboard pattern created by the 2 column heights allows light to enter the guest rooms. Lundy designed many churches in the Sarasota area. An early church is the St. Paul's Lutheran Church Fellowship Hall of 1959. Here, the clear articulation of structure is allowed to become expressive and make a dramatic, sheltering roof. The building served first as the sanctuary when it was first built, the first building on the campus. In the book, Christopher Dahman writes, in Lundy's Fellowship Hall, the wood structural elements rise effortlessly from the masonry piers. The interior space is reminiscent of the inverted hull of a wooden ship, graciously sheltering the fellowship. Uninterrupted glazing connects the interior to the north and south porticos. When looking up at the ceiling, you can see the laminated beams and how they appear to weave together, directly connecting the interior to the exterior. And here's the side portico that Dahman was referring to. 10 years later, Victor designed St. Paul's Lutheran Church sanctuary, completed in 1969. Here, a more articulated roof structure with this highly engineered cable system hung from the ridge beam. This hybrid truss is composed of a continuous and relatively slender triangular steel ridge beam with 8 triangular frames that are spaced at about 18 feet apart. In the book, C. Ford Petrus writes, for an exhibition of his and his wife's work shown in Marfa, Texas in 2006, Lundy produced a remarkable retrospective series of large-scale perspective renderings of selected examples of his earlier work. On this slide, we can see a photo of the exhibit, and on the right is a watercolor by Anstis Lundy. Ford Petrus continues, to represent the sanctuary of St. Peter's Lutheran Church in Sarasota, Lundy produced a stunning 4-foot by 8-foot carbon pencil and charcoal rendering on heavy paper. In a vision both calm and luminous, even ethereal, Lundy, the artist, poetically conveyed the original intentions that Lundy, the architect, conceived for this structure and space. This original 4-foot by 8-foot drawing and several others are also at the Library of Congress. This one took several scans to get this one image. While Lundy is really well known for his religious structures, he also designed community centers and office buildings. Here in the Galloway Furniture Showroom of 1959, we see how early sketches show how easy it was for Lundy to convey ideas to clients and also understand clients' needs. There's a notation on the upper right that reads, dull, dark wood, monotone, let furniture sparkle as against black. And it was this building that was the Modern Furniture Showroom that was a place that all of the local architects would go to get their modern furniture for their photo shoots. This building is currently owned by the Sarasota Museum of Art. Here we see another sketch of Lundy's, and he refers to that central structure as a morning glory shape made out of laminated redwood arches. We see those under construction in this photo. And a detail of how the floor of the mezzanine meets that central form and how the mezzanine level appears to float in that space. So by the late 1950s, Lundy's Sarasota practice was growing, but he felt that he needed to leave Florida to get projects outside of the state. So in 1960, Lundy established an office in New York, but continued working on projects in Sarasota. And this came true. So in 1955, we can see how Lundy's work was really only in Florida. And 10 years later, he had work in other states, just 5 years after he started his New York office. And not to jump too far ahead, but 1975 and 1985, that is not the exact location of Sri Lanka, but I just wanted to fit it on the slide. So he's moved to New York, and one of his first projects in the area was the Westport Unitarian Church, 1961. Here is one of his beautiful drawings using colored pencils on brown craft paper, and how he shows these wood laminated beams that in this section, we can see how they curve dramatically upward and rise 65 feet above the floor of the sanctuary. And there's a continuous glass skylight that really creates tension between the two halves of the curving roof. And I find it fascinating that when faced with a limited budget, somehow Lundy convinced the clients to build the roof first. So worship services were held open air on the earthen floor under this dramatic roof until they could raise enough funds to build the enclosure. And in case you're wondering, This is the completed building from above. It does get cold in the area. This drawing of a sleeping Buddha from southern India, from one of Lundy's many travel sketchbooks, served as the inspiration for the I. Miller shoe store in New York City of 1962. Here, in one of the sketches in one of his many brains books that were 8.5 by 11 black hardbound sketchbooks, he notes his intention to cut through the 3 structural bays on the second floor to make a 35-foot tall entry space wrapped by a mezzanine above. The dramatic entry is kind of hinted at in the large glass window with a mostly stone facade above it that faces Fifth Avenue. Lundy created a wood curtain that starts on the outside and sweeps down low past a perimeter beam and lowers the scale of the selling space and then sweeping it up, as he says, to culminate in a railing for the mezzanine. It was his intention to create an abundant, luxurious atmosphere. Lundy wrote that the owner leased 2 stories on a major shopping corner in New York City. The street level was too small for the selling area required for the owner for a high-priced shoe salon. I solved the problem by thinking of the available volume as an entity that was part of the original restrictions and discipline, with the only fixed elements being the existing columns and beams that support the multi-story New York office building above. So here we can see how that curved wood ceiling becomes the balustrade and how they meet at the corner column. Another interior renovation project completed a few years later is his Singer Company showroom of 1965. It began with early drawings to investigate the design and forms and showing how those different form could be deployed in the space, understanding that many of the columns were different sizes and shapes. And he worked out the geometry before computer-aided drawing. And Lundy is really interested in how things are made. He often worked with timber structures who produced this shop drawing of the fabrication of the wood elements. So they worked on many of his buildings, and sometimes Victor would visit the factory and draw at full scale to get the geometry just right. Here we see clear hemlock strips are used to create these wooden pedals. And those pedals are seen against a curved plaster ceiling. Lundy also worked in other mediums. He developed sometimes forms from a clay model or early plan drawings and developed the spaces through section. Here in this construction photo, we can really see how the ceiling becomes kind of a tent-like structure of these cedar slats that hang from the concrete structural walls. And the integration of the pipes of the organ with those slats on the ceiling. And here's the project completed. Again, Christopher Dahman writes, the 16 churches designed by Lundy are technologically precise and defined by measurable forces in the world. But the resultant spaces are certainly more than a sum of their constituent parts. It is in these places that material and space oscillate to form an original vision of the world. Lundy also used small linear wood elements to design a temporary shade structure for the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. in 1965. Here he designed 3 suspended squares, each composed of a series of 3/4-inch square Western red cedar vertical strips that are hung on cables and in concentric circles. And these create shade below while also being transparent to breezes. And while Lundy did a lot of projects with wood, he was interested in other materials. We're not going to show you all of his work tonight, but here at the IBM Garden State Office Building in Cranford, New Jersey of 1964, he's exploring masonry And here that masonry wall appears to kind of rise from the ground. And here's a detail of that exterior masonry wall. The interior hall was designed to be an inspiring space for the sales force. And it was formed by fiberglass formwork that molded the concrete structure. So while it looks like wood strips, it is a concrete material. Lundy has had a deep interest in structures. He writes, as an architect, I have always been involved from the start in the systems that help give form and life to a complex project. The realm of structural engineering and the theory behind its design, the order of intelligent mechanical systems, and the intellectual discipline, all of which give sinews, muscle, and bone to form, and without which can lead to the proliferation of arbitrary decisions. Lundy was asked in 1960 by the Atomic Energy Commission to design an exhibition building that could be moved to various cities in South America as part of the U.S. Atoms for Peace project. He designed a 22,000 square foot exhibition building, and the building needed to be easily shipped, erected, dismantled, and then shipped again. And in his archives, it shows how he explored wood and steel frame before deciding on pneumatics and working with Walter Bird at Bird Air. Lundy says he wanted it to be a sassy, unafraid example of U.S. ingenuity. The building traveled to Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro, Lima, Mexico City, Santiago, and Bogota. And then it was refurbished and then traveled some more. Lundy says the inspiration of the form was his wife Anstis laying on the beach on her side. Lundy worked again with Walter Bird of Bird Air to develop 3 restroom and hot dog stands for the World's Fair of 1964 and 1965. He revised the design in order to reduce the number of curved sections and the fabric size in order to gain some efficiencies. Here, the segmented fabric forms a globe shape that floats to a height of 75 feet, soaring above the crowds and providing shelter to those below. The forms were easy to find, and the fabric allowed the forms to glow at night. Looking up from above, they appear as flowers suspended in space, with the stitches and fabric joinery throwing patterns onto the surfaces. And here we see Victor enjoying the space flowers. Victor designed the U.S. Embassy in Colombo, Sri Lanka, completed in 1984. He was hired in 1961 and visited then the country of Ceylon for the first time. And this project was truly a study in patience, with alternating ambassadors and changes to the program and size, obviously interrupted by the Vietnam War. Many schemes were explored for the embassy. The site was relatively flat, sandwiched between an urban area and on the west bordered by a railroad line and the Indian Ocean beyond. An early scheme was a large kind of rectangular block. He had been encouraged by his clients to make a simple flat roof. Yet both the ambassador and Lundy somehow wanted something that spoke of the Sri Lankan culture. He wrote that he has an awareness, I believe, of the obligations of my work. I'm very anxious to do honor to my country, to the people who have put their faith in me. I will try to design an embassy that isn't thin or skimpy, that can stand as a real, timeless symbol of what the United States stands for, and that I hope the Ceylonese people will love. I hope never to forget the big sense of what all this work is about. After a design review meeting, Lundy sketched this sloped roof in his brains book that later was incorporated into the building design. Lundy had studied the lattice work and traditional woodwork in India and Ceylon. He completed numerous paintings and sketches, like this painting that shows the play of shadow and light. He wrote, "The roofs in all cases were beautifully framed in wood, great steep shelter and shade roofs that sweep down to the low eaves." This early sketch shows how Lundy studied the views enjoyed by people standing and sitting occupants at the nearby balcony. And here we see the wood screens installed at the balconies that he developed. After the initial trip and the early 1960 schemes, the project was put on hold, but a new contract was signed in 1977. And here we can see the drawings from the 70s with the wood screen evident, also in this model. The construction documents were drawn in Houston while Lundy was teaching at the University of Houston. And this model shows the steep sheltering roof and the roof detailing on the long elevation. This model is now at the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C. So teak was used extensively in Sri Lanka, and Lundy detailed his roof screens. We can see all of his details, and we can see where they came from in his sketches, in his sketchbooks, looking at traditional architecture, but also him working out his own sketches. And he even made a prototype connection detail that pulls apart in order to show the Sri Lankans how to build the screens. And here we see them, how he translated his understanding of local details into these kind of more modern wood screens that are on the face of the embassy building. The embassy building also has, it's a concrete frame building with this 4-inch thick bush hammered stone that contrasts with those kind of darker wood fin panels. The completed project was published in Architecture in July 1984. And in 1988, the U.S. Embassy in Colombo was selected from more than 500 submissions and received the Federal Design Achievement Award, the National Endowment for the Arts' highest honor in design. In the book, the chapter on the U.S. Tax Court building was co-authored by Joan Brierton and Sarah Gardner. They're both preservation specialists, and they were also instrumental in the building, the tax court building, being placed on the National Register of Historic Places, and the GSA-produced film, Sculpture of Space. If you have not yet seen it, it is available on YouTube. It's a fantastic film and introduction to Victor and his work. Here in the massing sketch, you can see the separate volumes for each of the 3 courtrooms. And again, we see it in another later sketch. The exterior is clad in granite from Georgia, and the center courtroom is the main courtroom. It's 252 feet wide and cantilevers 26 feet, and is appropriately intimidating as you walk up the steps to the tax court building. The interior Hall of Justice is this pretty elegant, dramatic entry space. And at the back are pedestrian bridges that contain the post-tension steel cabling that connects to the columns at the rear of the building that holds up those cantilevered courtrooms. And this elegant solution was worked through with Lundy and his structural engineers, Severin Associates. Those wood fins are teak fins that bring a warmth to the space that's maybe more easily shown in this contemporary snapshot that I took. And you can look out through that really thin bronze anodized aluminum frame window wall towards the plaza that was completed in 1981 and more recently renovated. Lundy says that this building is a culminating work in my career as an architect. And is it in DC, near the tax court building, where Lundy's archives are housed at the Library of Congress. I just want to share a little bit about that. There's 48,000 items, rolls of drawings, his notebooks, his sketchbooks, travel sketchbooks, photographs, slides, and banker boxes of all sorts of things. So drawings, rolls of drawings, trace drawings, many rolls of trace drawings, and all of his construction documents are there. And these are really great because you can see the details, but you can also see who else worked on it, and you can get the dates, and you can get a lot of information from the construction documents. And as I mentioned, his brains books, and these are 8.5 by 11 sketchbooks. many of them, 221 of them, and they're labeled with what's inside. And inside are sketches, slips of paper slipped in, notes, dimensions. And I traveled with Victor to see Mari Nakahara, who is the curator of the architecture, design, and engineering at the Library of Congress. And we visited his archives. And it was a bit odd to have Victor wear gloves to touch the drawings that he had drawn many years ago. But it was a sincere delight to have him share the stories of the buildings he's designed with us in a room kind of surrounded by his work. Lundy moved his practice to Texas in the mid-1970s when he was invited to teach at the University of Houston. He also later designed much larger institutional and commercial buildings, such as those shown here, when he served as vice president and design principal at HKS from 1982. He worked with HKS from 1982 to 1998. He also designed several projects in Houston that Stephen Fox will now share with you. Stephen?
Thank you, Donna. I want to thank both Donna and Jim for inviting me to participate with Steve Curry in this program about the architecture of Victor Lundy. And I'm going to talk about Victor Lundy's buildings in Houston. Can you guess which buildings in this slide Victor Lundy did not design? I chose these buildings because they are all structures on Mulberry Lane, the street in Bel Air, Texas, where Victor Lundy and his wife, the artist Anstis Lundy, lived for most of their time in Houston. This is where Lundy designed first an art studio for his wife, then on the same piece of property, the house which they shared until Anstis Lundy's death in 2009, which you see on the upper right. Indeed, if you look to the right of the house front in this Google Street View image, you can see Anstis Lundy's studio, which initially was attached to an earlier house occupying this half-acre lot in Bel Air. This is Victor Lundy's perspective drawing of the interior of the art studio, built in 1985. It gives you a vivid sense of how he drew what he imagined, boldly, but also precisely. What stands out to me is the curvature of one of the elliptical glue-laminated structural cedar arches that supports the studio's curved ceiling. In this drawing, you see how Lundy shaped the studio's profile to bring in daylight from the north through the high-set window on the left, as well as the canopies of neighborhood trees. This elevation drawing shows the precision with which the wood frame studio was clad, with crisp wood sheathing, framing slot windows. While the section drawing, basically peeling back the outside wall to glimpse how the studio is organized spatially, also shows how the studio is to be built. Here is a photo from 2017 showing Mr. Lundy and Donna in the studio, lit by daylight from the band of high, north-facing windows on the upper right. You can see how the daylight traces the down curve of the studio ceiling to the left. This is Victor Lundy's elevation drawing of the front of the house, designed in 1987, which you may recognize from the Google Street View. This drawing reminds me of the drawings Donna showed for the much larger embassy building in Sri Lanka. Again, note the simplicity, economy, and precision with which the street front is put together. The two-car garage on the left is lower than the rest of the house, more apparent in a photo than in the drawing. I call attention to this difference because it is instructive to see how Lundy made architecture out of the difference in roof heights, which you are instantly aware of inside, as you stand with your back to the backyard and look at the band of light above the line of kitchen cabinets and appliances set against the rear wall of the garage. A close-up again gives you insight into Lundy's spatial imagination, how he used the offset between the lower garage roof and the taller ceiling of the house to insert the high-set clear-story band of glass and bring daylight into the interior from an upper level. Continuing the upper clear-story window band above the front door means that the entry is also illuminated from on high. Looking from the kitchen back toward the front door, the entry may seem rather narrow. But when you walk into the house, you experience the opposite visual effect. The corridor widens as it approaches the house's big space, where food preparation, eating, and sitting are combined. A space that takes your breath away because it is suffused with daylight, transparency, and the lush greenery outside. Walking into the Lundy's living room is an exhilarating spatial experience. You may note that the white wall above the fireplace opening is in light rather than in shadow. Although when I took this photo in the afternoon, the sun was coming from behind the fireplace wall. That is because there is a high-set skylight above the fireplace, which the ceiling plane hides from your awareness when you enter the space. Rather than trying to figure out how daylight could seemingly be coming from two opposite directions at once, you are simply mesmerized by the buoyant simplicity and expansiveness of this space. And then there's the really big surprise, the big scoop of space that sets this otherwise serene interior into dynamic play. I illustrate the roof plan of the house in blue to show how Lundy made this immense quarter circle incision into the rectilinear body of the house. In the drawing, it looks arbitrary, but when you experience it, you are totally blown away by the effect of space and light in motion. It is stunning and frames vistas from inside the house deep into the backyard. Although more serene than the living room with its big curve, the house's two bedrooms are just as impressive in displaying Lundy's ability to shape spaces that are intimate in scale. In this case, by juxtaposing the white wall plane, the exposed wood ceiling beams and decking, and admitting daylight from a variety of sources to imply particularities of use. From the Lundy house and studio, we'll move to the studio Victor Lundy designed and built for himself, which is not located in Bel Air, but in the Gulfton neighborhood, a classic mixed-use strip of unzoned Houston between Bel Air and Sharpstown. This is the site plan, which illustrates the nature of the site, a flagpole line coming from the street, which is on the right, to the studio building, which is on the far left, which lies behind another building that actually faces the street. This is how you enter the site. Here is the interior of the Lundy studio. One big steel-framed room, 20 feet high, with the pre-engineered steel building system components all exposed, as is the concrete floor slab. The white-walled surfaces, set within the main frame of steel columns and horizontal channels, is simply vinyl-backed insulation. The studio is just this one tall open space. The present owner showcases his classic cars here. The architecture consists of the gray-walled island structure where Lundy consolidated mechanical, plumbing, and storage. What is subtle about the Lundy studio is how nature, the canopies of trees, the sky, daylight, get brought inside, animating the big space and imbuing it with a serenity which is, once again, not what you expect. I especially love the much narrower south-facing clerestory window, that high-set window on the side wall. When you see it on the ground, you wonder, is it my imagination that the window doesn't seem to line up with the roof? The answer is no, it's not just my imagination. The roof is ever so slightly taller on the right side than on the left side, so that it slopes and is indeed not parallel to the top of the window. This is a sleight of hand to see whether or not you're paying attention. Plus, of course, a sloped roof drains more efficiently than a perfectly flat roof. I conclude with Victor Lundy's 21st century work in Houston, a house completed in 2003 in the West End neighborhood. Designed for an interior designer who is also an art collector, the house is built using the same pre-engineered steel building system as Lundy's studio. The house is closed toward the street. It's within sight of the busy Washington Avenue Shepherd Drive intersection. Slotted onto a lot that is now framed on either side by multi-story townhouses. The house is vertical in proportion, which is how Victor Lundy conceived the space when he drew this perspective sketch, which shows the steel columns and beams, the tall interior ceiling, and the faceted inward turn of the house's glass curtain wall, which is very much how you experience the house. A one-story room backing up to the street-facing garage has a lower ceiling than most of the ground floor, which enabled Lundy to insert a line of windows above the roof of the one-story portion, and again bring the sun and surrounding trees into your experience of the house. Photographs can make the interior look monumental, but what you feel there is its expansiveness, especially as the north-facing glass sidewall steps in angled facets toward a point. To make the garden patio part of the interior. As in his own house, Lundy envisioned uses of space ingeniously, as underneath the stair, which most architects would have enclosed to become a closet. Instead, Lundy left the space open, leading his client to insert furniture in ways that respond to the space's intimacy. From within, here a second-story loft bedroom overlooking the two-story living room, you see how Lundy provides for a variety of spatial experiences, even in a small house. I conclude with this photo looking from outside in. You sense how raw the house's surfaces are, yet at the same time, what a calm, welcoming, and enlivening space the house possesses. What impresses me about Victor Lundy's Houston architecture is how much artful mastery he packed into these otherwise modest buildings, a testament to his subtle and sublime genius as an architect. Steve, take it away.
Thank you, Stephen and Donna. That was a lot to look at together in a short amount of time. Donna, I wanted to start, if there are questions coming in, go ahead and put them in the chat, but I wanted to especially have a chance to talk about how fortunate we are to have so much of this evidence of Victor's amazing career, so well documented and preserved. And I don't know that Joan Brierton is with us tonight, but so I wanted to ask you about, this is maybe a complicated question, but talk about the sequence of the book, the film, and the process of archiving so much of the work in the Library of Congress. What was the sequence there? What led to which?
Well, the sequence was the tax court building going on to the becoming a historic place, right? And so documenting that, and that is work that I was not involved with, that
Right.
Joan Brierton and Sarah Gardner did. So when it became a registered building, GSA decided to make a video of the building. And as they were starting the process of documenting the building for the video, they decided it was a slightly bigger story to tell.
Wow.
And so the video, while it does focus on the tax court building, it also tells a story of Victor's life. And in the making of it, the conversation started to be had with the Library of Congress and others about what to do with his work, with his archives. And so no, thank you. Somebody just came in. I don't know. I'm in my office. There was also a conversation about trying to get his archives at the Library of Congress. And so in the video, you'll see all of his work in his studio building that Stephen just showed us. And so that happened. The work went to the Library of Congress, and it took a while to be sent there, to be put together and sent there. The video came out. This kind of all happened approximately 2014. All those had been complete. And I hadn't met Joan Brierton, and I knew Victor, and that many people had wanted a book on Victor. And I talked to Joan on a visit to DC, just called her, emailed her, and we set up coffee and talked a little bit about this. And she said she would love to help me with the book. And so all of the work that Joan and Sarah did was prior to my involvement and the book. So the correct order, I think, is the tax court building gets registered, the film gets made, and kind of at the same time, his archives are going to the Library of Congress. And all of those things really conspired to help the book get written too. Because without having everything at the Library of Congress, while not completely organized and all documented, it was one place to find, untold treasures.
And Victor was at a point in his life where he could participate in all of that and facilitate it, obviously. Didn't Joan and a team come down and spend repeatedly to go through that studio room after Ansys had passed away? We saw a shot of Stevens of just the whole room basically filled one wall, at least of boxes and archives, and all of that was, and not to mention half the room was full of paintings, his and hers. All of that was reviewed, documented, and archived to some degree, and a lot of that went to the Library of Congress, and that was the process, boots on the ground, sort of, with Victor, obviously, of going through all that, right?
Yeah, but most of his archives was at his studio.
Yeah,
the metal building piece, and so that's where you'll see in the video Victor and his drawings in his studio before they got sent to the Library of Congress. So the video was made prior to his work being shipped off.
and so as you showed those great shots of Victor, the gloved Victor in the room, going through all his lifetime's work, it was incredible. And I think we can go to Washington, D.C., probably by appointment, and do that ourselves. But what I don't think a lot of people know, and I'm constantly reminding people, so here's a chance while 50 or so of us are together tonight, is that not all of it, but a great deal of it is available online. And
Yes,
in my dumb searching, I put in Victor Lundy Library of Congress, and There it is on your screen, right? You can
Yeah,
turn
the
pages
first
into-
things to be scanned were his World War II sketchbooks. So those have all been scanned and are available for
You can
anybody.
sit there on anybody with a PC with a device can turn the pages of those sketchbooks.
Yeah.
It's absolutely amazing.
And then his architectural archives, not all 85,000 are available online, but many, everything that is in the book from the Library of Congress was scanned. I paid for the scanning, and then after it gets scanned, it goes up onto the website. So there are some things that didn't end up being in the book, but that are scanned and are available on just on the website. And there are a few things I think that are only available if you're in the Library of Congress. And of course, to see the physical thing, you have to physically go there.
So you mentioned the book. This is a good time to ask about that because people ask us at Houston Mod all the time. We have books. We don't have that book. What do people do to find that book now? It's out of print, right?
It's out of print, but I think there's still some copies at Amazon or things like PAL Books, or there's other booksellers that have either new copies or used copies.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
I don't know that there's any place in town that it's available. Maybe if there's a half price books, there might be one every once in a while comes up.
Yeah, I think Brazos had it when it was new. I don't think they have it now. Okay, thank you. Here's a question that you could take too, but let's let Stephen have a turn. This one probably is probably one that resonates with nearly all of us. Someone said that they're amazed at Lundy's work every time they see it. Is there an easy explanation as to why he isn't better known?
Well, I'll ask Donna to back me up on that, but I guess in the 1970s, which was a good time for Houston, was not a good time for architects in New York. And so I think one of the reasons that Victor Lundy came to Houston to teach at the University of Houston was because his practice in New York, which had been so prolific in the 1960s and early 1970s, was sort of going through a bad time as the economy was. After he came to Texas, as Donna mentioned, he worked principally for HKS, a big corporate firm based in Dallas. And I think really spent the last, 15 or 20 years of his career doing buildings for HKS, sort of under HKS's name. So for that reason, once he was kind of out of the consciousness of New York, he was really remembered, I think, perhaps more for his buildings of the 1950s in Florida and the 1960s in the New York area. And it's really thanks to Donna and her collaborators that all of this work has been brought back together. And indeed, the great thing is that not only did Victor Lundy kind of get to see himself celebrated, but he's still around to enjoy those laurels.
Yeah, and I could add, we don't know what happens to people's careers, right? But one of the things, Victor had a small practice and doing mostly smaller projects in the 1950s and 1960s, right? And then these two big projects come in, the embassy in Sri Lanka and the US Tax Court building. And they both get interrupted by the Vietnam War. But if you're a small practice, you can't take an infinite number of projects. And so when maybe the US Tax Court building shows up, you don't take another church project or another smaller scale project that might not have gotten interrupted by the Vietnam War. And so, the project mix becomes more substantial, but the highs and lows also become more substantial. And Victor wasn't a marketing guru. He was dynamic, he was talented, but what he could sell was himself and his talents and his work, not necessarily, he didn't have anybody else, working his firm for him,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, he probably never hired a marketer in his life, right?
yeah, so some of those as the practice shifted maybe a little bit, and his work, both in Sarasota, the work he did out of New York, and the work he did here in Houston and out of HKS Dallas is all superb work. I mean, his project, he did this Omni Hotel in Austin. It's beautiful, building on Congress. Those are large scale buildings, but they're very they're also very impactful. They happen to be of a style of the 80s that maybe people don't treasure as much as they do mid-century modernism and more contemporary works.
Well, let's talk for a sec, because you haven't seen them all, I don't think, but you've seen a lot of them. Of the extant works, which ones do you recommend? I know that Sarasota is littered with beautiful early Lundy projects, and that's a whole story unto itself. I don't know if anyone from Sarasota is with us tonight. I hope so.
Yeah, and Cindy Strauss is saying that the Museum of Fine Arts Design Council is planning a trip to Sarasota for members of the Design Council that will be next spring. And that's a great time to see some of Victor Lundy's work. Certainly his churches in Westport are beautiful, but you need to talk to the congregation to get there. His tax court building, you can certainly walk by it. I don't recommend getting into tax trouble in order to go to the tax court building.
But it's quasi-public. Is it quasi-public that you can walk in with?
You cannot really walk in without an appointment, but there are often programs, either AIA, Washington, D.C., the Library of Congress, other preservation groups have done tours periodically.
Good. And of course, it's a good chance, again, while we're together, to remind that Jim mentioned at the start of the program that Saturday after next, which is September the 7th, we'll have an open house very informally at the Lundy House in Bel Air. Details forthcoming. We're still working out. The house, of course, is about to be on the market for the first time ever since since the Lundys were in it in 1988. So it's a wonderful opportunity, and we'll post those details just as soon as we can. We're still working on a few of those, but it's definitely going to be on Saturday, not this Saturday, which is the Labor Day holiday weekend, but the following Saturday, probably in the middle of the day, so everyone will have a chance to come by and we can look at it together. Hopefully on a beautiful fall day.
Well, I really appreciate Stephen talking about the light that hits the wall of the fireplace. I mean, it's so subtle of a move, right? But the impact that draws you deep into the space when that plane is lit. Thank you, Stephen, for reminding me of that one really powerful move in his project. And the building doesn't appear to be about light, but it is.
Well, Donna, I know you've talked about being entertained by Anstis and Victor Lundy in that house, and I just got to visit as an architectural tourist, but they were a great couple, and she was a very talented and recognized artist. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the social life of the house.
Well, I don't know all of the stories, but I think there were some wild things in the entry. There's a pipe that was on the side hallway. I mean, it looks almost like a plumbing pipe, but it is a designed vase. And often there were large flowers in the vase that kind of came into the space. And it was, as you described, coming from that hallway into this large, gracious space. And their dinner parties were often not necessarily about the food. They were really about the people coming together. There were costumes, there were funny masks and mustaches that people would put. I mean, it was a lively space filled with artists and a collection of people from different experiences and different points of view, all interested in lively conversation and fun antics.
And the house is completely intact, right? It's exactly designed and built in phases, as Stephen mentioned, but it's complete as it was in 1988. It served all their purposes for entertaining and living, and I think there are virtually no changes to it since then.
Yeah, it's not been, nothing has to be undone, right? And Stephen mentioned the garage and the lower height. The other thing, I mean, this is again so subtle, but the garage has a glass door and the paving outside goes all the way into the garage. And so when the garage door is open, it feels a little bit more like a carport than a garage space. And so this interrelationship between the exterior and the interior is really pretty fantastic.
Yes, I just saw, you mentioned that, I just saw an early house of his, I didn't see it tonight, from 1953 or 4, I think, in Sarasota, that a very similar relationship, now that you mention it, with carport, in that case exposed structure, but the relationship was simple and low slung, one story, not the volumes that came later, but similar in that way.
Yeah, he designed 2 buildings, 2 residences in Sarasota.
And did you mention, or did I see that it was actually a residential commission that sort of first prompted him to start in Sarasota? That's what got him there in the first place, and that's what led to his first practice.
Yes, when he was working at another firm in partnership that brought him to Sarasota, he ended that partnership and started his own practice in Sarasota.
And stayed there about a decade, I think, 9 or 10 years. And
Yes.
built a
8 years.
lot in that 9 or 10 years.
And then going, so quickly to New York in 1960, and then all of a sudden having built work. I mean, it's kind of a quick moving.
Well, lost my train of thought on Sarasota. He was there getting all that done in less than a decade. Paul Rudolph started there and built a lot too. Paul Twitchell, many other. I mean, it must have been a hotbed of young architects starting their careers apparently at that time.
Well, Sarasota, it was one after the war, very optimistic time, but also Sarasota was a winter community. And so the homes that people were designing there or were building there were often winter homes. And so there was a lightness and an experimental maybe quality that people would have for a winter home that you might not have for a permanent home. So a vacation home could be maybe a little bit more experimental. And there were a lot of young architects there, often called the Sarasota School. Though Victor says it was no school, it was competition.
Yeah. They were even frenemies, I don't think. They were out and out competitors, right? But Docomomo was there for, I think, their first national symposium in 2013, so a full 10 years ago, and I got to go to that. I hope that people will be able to join and travel with MFAH Design Council next spring, because it is, I said littered with Lundy, but it's remarkable to see those buildings, the public buildings and the churches in a relatively small area. It's a great opportunity. Couple more questions. back to Houston, I think, who was behind the U of H College of Architecture hire? I think Jenkins had been dean there for quite a while at the time. I've always assumed that Lundy was one of Jenkins' heroes and that he jumped at the chance to get him there.
No, that is not how that
Okay,
worked.
never mind that.
It was, so I see that question came from Cindy Strauss,
Yeah.
who also mentioned the Aspen House. So it
Yeah.
was in Aspen at a cocktail party where Victor Lundy met the then president of the University of Houston, who invited him on the spot to come teach. It was not the College of Architecture.
Okay.
So he got installed in the College of Architecture. Maybe not everybody's the faculty's full support. So from the upper level administration, you know, meeting somebody at a cocktail party and getting a job, you know, that was how things maybe worked then. They don't work that way today. So that is how he came to Houston.
I was an undergrad there when new to Houston when he came to Houston. I had him as a design prof, and it was very interesting to see all the interaction between. It was a disparate bunch anyway. It was pre Johnson building in the late 70s, early 80s. So everybody was doing their own thing. It was a very interesting time.
Oh, Cindy Toll. Sorry, Cindy. I got my Cindy's wrong I didn't pay attention to the spelling.
Yeah,
Well,
that's a good one, Cindy. I'm glad you asked that question, Cindy Toll.
Steve, why don't you tell us what it was like to have Victor Lundy as a design instructor?
Well, it was interesting from start to finish. You know, he was often brandishing almost threateningly a chunk of a large crayon or charcoal, and making sure we heard him admonish us to think big and to draw big. He wanted us to put down our repeatograph pens. We didn't have computers then, but we were starting to draw like computers. Lots of fine archigram sort of detail from the very start. But he thought that he wasn't comfortable with that. So we were always talking about that in terms of how to think and how to show what you're thinking in drawing form. And the bigger and the broader, the better. And it showed in a lot of his sketches too, from his Beaux Arts background. And it translated to the simplicity and the scale of his buildings. So we had a lot of fun. It was very interesting. But he was new to Houston then, and I think he was finding his place. You know, I remember thinking that it was odd that he had sort of a shuttle career at that point. He was flying to HKS, as I recall, for several days of the week, and then he was doing labs on, you know, Mondays and Fridays or something like that. And I think he was adapting to that circumstance. It was different than any other part of his career. I didn't know that much about his career. I think all we knew at as naive undergrads was about the tax court building, which was something we had maybe seen in magazines, but none of us had seen it firsthand. So we didn't understand what an accomplishment that was to be able to produce something like that for that client of all clients. So we probably suffered for not knowing as much about Victor as I do now, as I wish I had known then, because he was he was a private man. He kept a lot of his thoughts to himself. You had to seek him out, and then you had to work hard to get something from him. He had to be sure that you were serious about wanting to engage him before he'd give up much. So you had to go seek him out, and that made it interesting too.
Yeah, and his work is not flashy. It is, you know, he's paying attention to structure, to materials, and using them in interesting ways, but it's not, you know, something that is really in your face. It's a little bit more subtle, a little bit more experiential, as Stephen was talking about.
The other thing I remember is that he was appalled at our lack of knowledge of art history for the most part. You know, you don't know who Konstantin Brancusi is. You don't know who David Smith is. You don't know, you need to find out about these people. I think he changed his program for the semester and had us design, carve out sections of caves somewhere on the side of a cliff to make interior spaces for these sculpture that that he was inspired by and that he wanted us to be inspired by, as a way to talk about making space, before maybe worrying so much about building envelope and those stylistic concerns. We didn't know how lucky we were to have him, I'd say, to sum that up. One last question I'd say about, still in Houston, about his interaction with other Houston architects. He was in association with HKS for that latter part of his career. I don't know that he did any joint venture projects or had any other associations professionally with other architects other than the ones that he knew professionally at the University of Houston as colleagues.
I think he was a good friend and wanted to be a colleague with Harwood Taylor. I know Cynthia Taylor, Harwood Taylor's wife, really loved Victor Lundy. And so she talked a lot about Harwood Taylor and Victor Lundy's effort to establish a practice. But again, I think basically by the time that Victor Lundy got to Houston, all of the kind of good economic times were beginning to wear thin, and particularly in the early 80s, when Houston's economic downturn came. I think that kind of doomed the desire for Harwood Taylor and Victor Lundy to have a professional association.
Yeah, but they did have a professional association. They had the Taylor Lundy Partnership, 1982 to 1987, and that you'll see documents at the Library of Congress that have it listed. Sometimes Victor Lundy and Associates Inc., sometimes Victor Lundy and Harwood Taylor, sometimes Taylor Lundy Partnership, sometimes Taylor Lundy Partnership with HKS. And so, speaking to the changing economic times, right? So the small partnership connected with HKS, and then, over time, Victor, then that partnership dissolved and Victor moved on with HKS in Dallas. And so, there was a lot of different, maybe trying different things out, different business relationships, right, over time.
Well, okay, last question as we approach 8 o'clock. Did Victor have any hint of a New York accent or a Russian accent? I'd say no, he didn't. I don't know when he had one or if he lost it. He was born in Brooklyn, wasn't he? Manhattan. He wouldn't have agreed to Brooklyn.
Yeah.
No, I don't think he had an accent at all. I would have thought he was from the Midwest.
So I'm not going to answer that question. I'm going to answer another question
Sure,
that
go
was
for it.
asked. But the one of the more recent gatherings, there was Victor and many other people. Victor broke into song, singing a Russian song. And we all thought it was some kind of anthem. And it was not. It was a kind of bawdy little tune about women. So
in Russian.
He uses his understanding of Russian for love rather than for soldiering or war or any kind of
you prompt a memory. I remember him talking a little bit about some experience from World War II, and what he said he learned about Russians was how much like Americans they were. He said they were indistinguishable. If you had them if they weren't in their uniforms, you couldn't have told one from the other, or the way they sounded. He said he couldn't believe how much like Americans, the Russians he met were. It was an interesting observation from a young soldier.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone. I think we should turn it back over to Jim at this point, and I'll just plug the open house opportunity on Saturday the 7th again. We'll send out details about that and hope to see everyone there. Take it away, Jim.
Well, I mean, what is there to say, but that was a fantastic program, and I am always happy to get to hear about Victor Lundy. I was saying to everybody before we came online that just flipping through the pictures and looking at the slideshow in advance of the program, it's just incredible. Every once in a while I'll run across a picture of one of his works or a reference to one of his works, and I'll go, wow, that's fantastic. And then when you see it all together, you just realize how remarkable it is. And I'm so glad that we can talk about it. I saw there was a comment from John Walker that he had not known about Victor Lundy before tonight, and I think he's a fan. So maybe he's not the only one. That's great. But Donna and Stephen, your mission is accomplished, right? And I do want to point out the book, which we mentioned earlier, Victor Lundy, Artist Architect. While the program was underway, I checked two places online, abebooks.com and eBay, and there are copies available on both. You can get a better deal on Abe Books than you can get on eBay, but depending on what your thing is. So they are out there. I don't know how much luck you'd have finding one in town, but it is never a bad thing to go to Half Price Books and see what you can turn up. So that's a good excuse, right? Everybody who registered for tonight's program, as soon as we get the details set for that open house, you will get it in an email. So keep an eye on your email for not only the recording of tonight's program, but also the details about the Lundy open house. And thanks to all of you for being here tonight. Donna, Stephen, Steve, thank you for a wonderful evening. It was a real treat. And I hope that we will all get to see each other soon in Bel Air.
Thanks, Jim.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.